Blue light is the meth of light. You can make yourself overweight, hyperglycemic by simply looking at blue light. Dr. Paul Saladino, he's eating 300 grams of carbs a day, but he's still metabolically healthy. So that's basically a stab in the heart of this carbohydrate insulin hypothesis. It's not enough to explain things. Dermatology profession has literally put UV light in a sack and kind of kicked it on the ground. The process of healing is getting rid of the man-made refined sources of food and light.
Dr. Max Gulhane, thanks for coming on the podcast. Could you please begin with an introduction of who you are and what you're interested in, please?
Yeah, thanks, Owen. I'm a general practice registrar. So in Australia, general practice is like family medicine for your US listeners. And what I do is I work in a clinic, but I also help to promote more holistic approaches to health. And the goal there being that a lot of the way medicine is focused on, for better or for worse, is at the stage where people are already sick. And the problem with this is that there's a decade period for people that get diabetes, dementia, heart attacks, strokes, where this could be prevented. And although what a lot of the things that we do within medicine is very helpful, especially when people get to that end stage of this illness journey, for me, I don't think it's really good enough to wait when we know what works in terms of helping people potentially avoid getting chronic diseases. And there's nothing more sad than to see someone who was interested in making changes that could have improved their lot, but simply weren't offered the correct advice or weren't given the tools, the lifestyle tools that they needed, the dietary advice, the light advice, to change their life for the better. So that is like the underlying reason why I'm interested in this and why I do what I do. And I obviously host a podcast too, talking about these issues, is because I think that people deserve to know what they can do that really works to help them live the healthiest life. And there's lots to be said about the structure of the healthcare systems, and I don't think it's not controversial to say that it's a customer-based system, and the industries that profit because people are unwell, and a patient cured is a customer lost. And when you have worked in the hospital system and you can see the degree to which resources and money is spent to help keep people well, or to help heal people who are that sick, then it really starts to make sense. And what I think we can do, and what our job as doctors is to really be acting as preventative health, giving people guidance on preventative health. So essentially that's what I'm interested in. And the way that the strategies that I think work are the ones that I emphasize, are particularly around dietary strategies and light-based strategies. So I believe, and from my patient interactions, going a very low carbohydrate or carnivore type diet is extremely effective, and regulating our circadian rhythm and aligning our light environment with our circadian biology. So those two topics, what I call is the light diet and the food diet, if you get both of them right, then you can do a lot you can do an enormous amount for preventing disease and reversing disease.
Yeah, I think that's a good point, that you're focusing on like preventative, because like you said, you can catch it a lot easier, you can save people a lot of suffering, and also it can be a lot cheaper if people can then like avoid like surgeries and having expensive medications or whatever, if they can just like stop it before it even starts to get worse, because you can get to the point where it's kind of the point of no return and you can't actually fully cure them, and it's just kind of just prolonging their life in like a care home or in a hospital or something.
Exactly. And you can see someone on dialysis who's got end stage kidney disease from a lifetime of type 2 diabetes. That's an irreversible point. And to be anchored into a chair, having your blood filtered through a machine, that no one wants to go through that. And we can avoid it if we, as we talked about, if we can make these changes early and prevent diabetes, prevent insulin resistance, get people metabolically healthy and without all this visceral fat, and they'll thrive and they'll feel great, and everyone wins except whoever's making money on the dialysis chair.
Yeah. Could you talk a little bit more about your story of how you kind of came to your dietary approach and the light side of things, and how, because you came from like the traditional um, medicine, like you were taught like the traditional kind of way, but some of your ideas aren't really widely accepted. How did you kind of get into those ideas, I suppose? Yeah.
Yeah, great question. And it's almost inevitable that people who are thinking in a way like this, and you've interviewed guys like Dr. Jack Cruz, I mean, hitting 360 pounds overweight. My story was that I had very bad acne, and I was in my early 20s. All the other kids had long since had their acne, got rid of their acne, and were kind of getting on with their early adulthood. And here I was with these very, very unsightly and very persistent and annoying pimples on my forehead and on my face. And I had encounters with general practitioners, with dermatologists, who basically just gave me the option of topical medications, which are creams, antibiotic creams, followed by oral medications when the creams didn't work, and which were quite heavy duty antibiotics. I mean, the same antibiotics that we use for a range of quite quite problematic bacterial infections. Doxycycline and the tetracycline class of antibiotics. They're very they're not a joke. And then eventually got hit with the heavy hammer, which was the isotretinoin and Roaccutane. And your audience and young people can recognize. You guys can do a spot diagnosis at uni or in school for anyone who's on Roaccutane, because their lips are incredibly dry and their skin looks red. It's photosensitive, meaning that you've got to be careful in the sun. And it's a very effective drug, but it is very heavy, and it has these side effects. One of them is mood, and I had quite severe mood side effects, so I just stopped taking the drug. But maybe we'll talk a bit about the circadian biology stuff later in the interview. But basically, your photoreceptors are tied to vitamin A, retinol. That's how, on a physiological level, that they work. So there's also some evidence that when you take this synthetic vitamin A, this retinoid compound, that you're actually interfering with their function and their regeneration. So all that to say is that I had this problem, and no one told me, hey, dude, get rid of the grains, get rid of the dairy, get rid of the sugar, get rid of the fruit, just get rid of these carby and glucose, fructose, and you'll do better. So, and no one told me that. And only after experimenting with a plant-based diet for about 7 months, I arrived at a low carb diet through a pretty good online repository of videos called Low Carb Down Under, and mainly it's doctors talking about how they're reversing their patients' diabetes with low carb. Anyway, so I put myself on a low carb diet, and the whole time I'm going through medical school. So I've done 4 years of Bachelor of Science. I've done some lab-based research with mouse models of inflammatory bowel disease. I'm going through an MD degree. I'm doing public health. So none of this lifestyle wasn't mentioned at all. So I found my way to low carb. I cured my acne. Then I kept going, and I found a carnivore type diet, which worked amazingly at the beginning. And then what I noticed is that after about 8-9 months of strict carnivore, I felt that my energy levels were sagging, and I didn't feel as optimized. And that's what made me kind of keep looking. And that's when I found the light and circadian rhythms and the quantum biology stuff. And really it fills in a big gap when you go down the quantum rabbit hole and the circadian biology rabbit hole, as your listeners might have done with Dr. Cruz and Dr. Sarah Pugh. But basically, this is giving us a really fundamental explanation of phenomena and energy and how the body works. So what I've come to is that I took what I learned and this parallel, I call it a parallel decentralized curriculum, self-guided curriculum of just inquisitive self-education. and all evidence-based. I really want to make that point because none of this is pseudoscience by any means. It's simply an uncovering or an unearthing and implementing of evidence-based practice that is simply just not reflected in mainstream treatment guidelines. And the reason, and it's obviously it's evidence-based not only, but it works, because when I advise my patients with these low-carb, carnivore, circadian rhythm type interventions, they heal. So I've been implementing that with patients in my clinic to amazing success. And from there have kind of expanded into doing an online course on circadian biology, and really obviously putting out podcasts to spread the word and really give people those tools that I mentioned earlier to heal themselves.
Yeah, awesome. Something I'm interested in. So there's some, as you got more into like the kind of omega-6 PUFA and circadian biology, have like carbs, like low carb, become less crucial in your mind? Because I know some people like Dr. Chris Knobbe have presented like populations who do eat quite high carb diets, but because they're living quite a natural lifestyle, obviously outside a lot of the time, most of the time, and low PUFA consumption, that they are still extremely healthy. Is that, would you say you're not as concerned about low carb as you used to be?
So it's very contextual, and I really need to caveat and make an individual case for each person, because if we are ideally circadian regulated, living on the equator, we're getting that full spectrum sunlight from the beginning to the end of the day, having complete absence of light at night, all the things that I teach as circadian best practice, the carbohydrates will become less important. But the reality is that most people aren't doing that. Most people are living in a less circadianly optimized light environment. So the food does become more important. So I don't throw the kind of I still emphasize both, and I really try and understand where each person's at when I'm advising them. I will say the first thing to do is optimize your light environment. I think that's key. I think that is the order of operations we need to sort out first. But it's also recognizing what people will change and what they won't change. The other point about it is that I'm much more strict if someone has signs of metabolic dysfunction or visceral fat. The reason is because they already have evidence that their metabolic machinery is broken. So really basic level, and maybe for your audience, and if you measure your waist circumference and it is more than half of your height, so above 0.5, then you're already in moving towards a danger zone. So your waist should be less than half your height, ideally around 0.45 probably. And what that is a proxy of is this fat in the abdomen, this ectopic fat depot. So we shouldn't have fat inside the visceral cavity if we're metabolically healthy. And it's really just a very crude but very it's a good proxy for someone's metabolic health. And we can in the clinic, we look at other markers of like metabolic dysfunction, so things like fasting insulin levels and blood pressure, blood glucose level, triglycerides, high density lipoprotein, all this kind of thing that might be more of interest to people's parents. But essentially, if you have signs of metabolic dysfunction, if you have a visceral fat, then you need to be much more strict about this both your light environment and particularly your carb intake. I've watched the recent video by Chris Knobbe, Dr. Chris Knobbe, on Low Carb Down Under, and he brings up two populations. So he talks about, and particularly one that was very interesting, was the Kitavans, which are a Melanesian population, and a highland population in Papua New Guinea. And basically he uses these two populations as evidence that it's not the carbs driving metabolic dysfunction. And what to show this is that he uses the example that the Papua New Guineans have a diet that's 96% by calories carbohydrates. So it's a very low protein, very low fat, high carb diet. They don't have metabolic disease. They don't have diabetes. They don't have any forms of they're eating slightly more fat, they're eating coconut oil, but it's a similar type of point, which is you can be metabolically healthy on a high carb diet. And I think Dr. Paul Saladino, who everyone knows, the carnivore MD, his switch from pure carnivore to this animal-based fruit consumption model, he's eating 300 grams of carbs a day, but he's still metabolically healthy. So that's basically a stab in the heart of this carbohydrate insulin hypothesis. It's not enough to explain things, because what the Katavans and Paul Saladino shouldn't be metabolically healthy if it were only the carbs. So, Dr. Chris Knobbe's explanation for this is it's the seed oils. And I agree. I think that they're definitely playing a role. And, I've got in kind of pissing contests, intellectual pissing contests with people about whether it's the omega-6, specifically whether it's the oxidative breakdown products of linoleic acid, or whether it's the deuterium. And on one side of the corner, you've got Tucker Goodrich, who's done amazing work and is I respect him a lot. And then on the other side, you've got more intelligent people like Dr. Laszlo Boros, who insists that it's the deuterium, and Dr. Cruz obviously as well. So that's a kind of an ongoing debate. I think the deuterium is a fundamental driver because of the fact that it's causing these structural problems with our ATPase nanomotors. But in terms of explaining why people are increasingly metabolically sick these days, I actually agree that from a dietary point of view, it is the seed oils. But in terms of explaining those native populations that Dr. Knobbe was talking about, those people would have an optimized circadian rhythm. They're grounded the whole time. They're in natural bodies of water. They're getting solar radiation, ultraviolet radiation. They're ticking all the boxes from a circadian biology point of view. So I think the reason why they are metabolically healthy is, yes, they have a low omega-6 diet, but they're grounded, they have a high solar yield, and they're doing the circadian rhythm things right. So I do agree that with Dr. Cruz that is a critical reason. And I think if we reanalyze Dr. Knobbe's talk with the kind of lens of circadian biology, then it makes a lot of sense. And I might make a quick comment about why that is the case. So let's see how light and circadian biology can affect metabolic health. And the reasons are numerous, but essentially all your metabolic organs, so your liver, your fat tissue, your pancreas, and your skeletal muscle, they're all running on circadian clocks, and they all rely on circadian signaling to be optimally healthy. So particularly your fat tissue, which secretes this leptin hormone, telling us how much energy we've got on board. That's a very, very important circadianly secreted hormone. So when you disrupt, or you're not getting these correct light cues, then on an endocrine and biochemistry level, it all starts going haywire. And then the other kind of facet of it is leptin resistance is tied to melatonin signaling. So if you're not making melatonin because you're blasting yourself with blue light until 1 a.m. on your iPad every night, and you're not getting that proper melatonin secretion from your pineal gland, you're also going to be interfering with your metabolic health. And insulin sensitivity, again, is peaking in the middle of the day, which makes sense because that's when we should be eating, and we shouldn't be eating at night. So that isn't even to go into all these quantum concepts, and Dr. Cruz talks a lot about melanopsin dysfunction and how that is potentially a major contributor to mitochondrial issues. But the suffice to say that if the inputs into the mitochondria are incorrect, then on a fundamental level, that's the kind of organelle that's dealing with all the metabolic processes. It's gonna have problems. And there's also other roles of light in terms of the red light, particularly stimulating or helping that ATPase from spinning. So it's a way of basically soaking up blood glucose or without food. And there was an interesting paper done recently where they gave people this oral glucose tolerance test where you have to drink the sugary water and expose one to red light and one not. And there was meaningfully lower kind of blood glucose levels in the red light exposed group. And where do you get red light? Well, you get it from the sun, especially in the morning and in the afternoon. So you can just see how sunlight is basically acting as an anti-diabetic drug. You can take these. You can take your morning metformin, or you can get out in the red light, and that's going to kind of reduce your blood glucose. So what I think is that we really need to think really holistically, and the seed oil only camp, I don't think they're missing pieces of this puzzle. The seed oil camp are missing. The diet only people don't have all the answers. And when we integrate circadian biology and the light stuff, then things I think make much more sense.
Yeah, for sure. I think it does make sense that it's multifactorial and it's not really often that simple. I think an interesting thing from like Chris Knobbe's kind of talks is there's like correlational evidence linking like seed oils and ill health, essentially chronic disease. But as I was watching it, I was just thinking, well, this could just be a proxy for industrialization or like westernization, whatever you want to call it. So maybe as they're getting more seed oils, they're getting more like processed food, they're getting more like endocrine disruptors, they're getting like more lights installed everywhere. So yeah, what's your thoughts on that?
I agree. I think that's definitely a possibility. I think in his talks he made a pretty convincing argument to me that in terms of the macronutrients that the seed oil itself is, versus the carbs and the sugar is more significant. But yeah, we're obviously not controlling for things like endocrine disruptors. And when those oils get packaged, those highly oxidative refined seed oils get packaged in a plastic bottle, you bet that they're going to be soaking phthalates and other kind of endocrine disrupting compounds into those oils. The other point that I'll make, and maybe I'll talk to Dr. Knobbe one point about this, is because he I believe he's an ophthalmologist, so he has studied a lot about age-related macular degeneration. I think he's missing the blue light story in AMD, and I'll tell you why. Is because the retina in your eye, it has the highest density of mitochondria in the body. So per kind of unit of area. So obviously we think about the brain, the heart, they're very dense, but in terms of organs, the retina has a massive density of mitochondria. And that is because the process of photoreceptor function and regeneration is enormously energy demanding. So what we know is that when you blast the retina with blue light, you do not, and especially light, including artificial light at night, you're not letting those photoreceptors regenerate properly. Because again, going back to this basic circadian biology, is you need this bright light during the day in its naturally waxing and waning wavelengths of visible and non-visible. Then you need complete absence of light at night. Complete. So think about how natural man and maybe those Catawbans that Dr. Knobbe observed, they are getting blue, but blue is always balanced by red. It's always balanced by infrared, and during the midday, it's always balanced by ultraviolet. And then it's waning throughout the day, and their photoreceptors are regenerating. So the idea is that people nowadays are simply getting all this artificial blue, isolated, no UV, no infrared, and they're getting it 18 hours a day. So and then they're not ingesting high quality sources of vitamin A. They're not ingesting DHA from marine preformed marine sources, which are also critical in the photoreception and transmission kind of pathway. And what I think that means is that the blue light is a massive player in AMD, and the mitochondria themselves absorb at 420 nanometers. And Dr. Robert Fosbury, who's an astronomer and very, very, very well-read, interesting polymath who's kind of going into this area, he's done a study with Glenn Jeffrey at UCL in London, and they show that the mitochondria are basically absorbing this isolated blue light, and it is affecting their kind of metabolism, and it's basically wrecking your mitochondria in your retina when you're exposed to blue light. So I agree that, and the seed oils are a big part of that, because if you're using if your diet's really rich in omega-6, it's really low in omega-3, particularly DHA, and we know that DHA is critical in this photoreceptor pathway, then that's definitely going to be a role. But if you stack the blue light on top of that, then to me that is a recipe for retinal diseases and macular degeneration.
Yeah, interesting. Because when I spoke to Dr. Knobbe, he did say one of his I think he said like his top 5 things. Going out in the sun was one of his top 5 things. So recently, I've been thinking, yeah, it'd be great if he could speak to someone from the kind of the circadian side and the blue light and see, because I think he'd be open to it. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think people hang on to one thing, and it's not to say that he always will, but you see it within this health space, is that people kind of have a hobby horse that they play on, and especially when they get very, very big and popular, it's difficult for people to move beyond that area, and it's understandable. But because yeah, sure, they built a reputation or a business on that approach. But I really think that it's our duty as health educators and doctors to not stop asking questions and not stop challenging ourselves and challenging our beliefs, our scientific beliefs, because uh, we owe it to our patients, and we owe it to people to constantly be striving to understand more and more and more and more about how the system is working and how the system is breaking. And Cruz always says a half truth leads to a full lie. I mean, I agree. I agree with that. But we also need to recognize that everyone's kind of, most people doing their best, but as long as we keep asking questions and don't sit down satisfied and rest on our intellectual laurels, I think that's important.
Yeah, absolutely. That's what I see Saladino now. He is talking about the circadian stuff a fair amount, but I think he knows Jack Cruz. He follows him on like Instagram and Twitter, and I just wish he would. I don't think actually Jack actually wants to speak to him, but I wish Paul would kind of embrace that a bit more and talk a bit more about that kind of stuff. You mentioned and I've heard this a lot, that the blue light during the day is always balanced with red and infrared light. Can you kind of explain a bit more like how that works? What's kind of happening in the body as it's being like balanced?
Yeah. So if we think about these, how the body recognizes light, so there's a whole bunch of photoreceptors that are being triggered here. So from a visual, and let's maybe lay it out a little bit more clearly, is that you've got this visual photoreceptive system and you've got your non-visual photoreceptive system. So the visual system are those rods and those cone cells that exist in the retina, and they have these opsin proteins that respond to a range of different visible light spectra. And what they're doing is helping you form images. So that's why I can see you, I can see your nice suit, I can see the computer in front of me. I can see a tiger that's about to kind of jump in front of me. This is the vision forming aspect, or the kind of camera forming aspect of vision. But what we also have is this non-visual photoreceptor system, and what that is like a detector. And if you have a detector in the corner of your room, like an alarm, when you walk across a light and it just triggers, it goes on and off, on and off. It just triggers like a motion detector. That's a one way to think about the non-visual photoreceptor system, because they're simply responding to the presence or absence of different light wavelengths. They're not telling you about an image. They're not showing you, your tie and your collar. They're just saying light got triggered or not, blue light got triggered or not. And there's a range of these special receptors and proteins that respond to different wavelengths of light. So melanopsin was basically the one that was discovered first, and that is a key one in training this idea of our circadian rhythm, because it's like when when it receives blue light, it's telling the body that it's wake up time, it's hunt time, it's do daily activities time. And that circuit, which goes all the way to the pineal gland via a range of neuronal circuits, is telling the body to stop making melatonin. So melatonin is that nighttime signal. It is that rest, repair, autophagy, apoptosis. So whenever the circuit is being signaled by blue light, it's stopping us from making melatonin. And when there's absence of blue light, then in our eyes, but not only our eyes, then you are able to make melatonin. You'll feel sleepy, and then your body can repair. So on a really basic fundamental level, you can just understand that when there's blue light in the environment, then you should be awake, and that's what the signal gets sent. And when there's no blue light in the environment, the body can start repairing, relaxing, winding down. And that is this duality, this key duality of light during the day, darkness at night. So that's kind of the basics of the system. But melanopsin is not the only non-visual photoreceptor. So there's a range of other ones. Neuropsin is one, which is triggered by ultraviolet light. So when people say ultraviolet light is inherently bad, well, explain to me why nature has given us a receptor that specifically can measure and trigger ultraviolet wavelengths. And there's encephalopsin is again in the blue wavelength, but there's a bunch of these non-visual photoreceptors. So what happens during the day, is that when you're getting natural blue light, you're triggering those signals, but you're not only triggering one of those receptors, you're triggering all the other ones that are also receiving this natural whole spectrum, natural sunlight. So the melanopsin is in your retina, in those intrinsically photosensitive retinal ganglion cells, but it's expressed in your skin too. It's just expressed on the surface of your skin. So you can, and neuropsin is expressed widely, as in the cornea particularly. But what I mean is that the distinction between the artificial and the natural sunlight is that when you're artificial blue, you're only getting that isolated blue. You're not triggering any other receptor but those but melanopsin. So that's just one way that we kind of can send a confusing signal, and that distinction between visible and non-visible. The other point about it is, think about when we're outside in natural blue, when it is there with UV, we're getting the mechanisms that are being triggered to darken the skin through melanin production, through alpha MSH and POMC. So the harm or the damage that the isolated blue it's going to be mitigated, and it's all kind of holistically dealt with by a system that's evolved to be exposed to that terrestrial electromagnetic radiation.
Yeah. So did the mitochondria act differently when it's just blue versus blue and red and all the other frequencies?
Undoubtedly, because think about what the mitochondria are doing. So they're receiving, not only are they the proteins of the electron transport chain are also what's known as cytochromes. They're actually receiving light signals. So 1 to 4, there's a range of them are red light chromophores. There's one that's a UV light chromophore. The water within the mitochondria is receiving infrared light. So they're all receiving different wavelengths to help the electron transport chain be optimized. The mitochondria itself is also receiving near infrared. So that is helping the mitochondria make this melatonin hormone in situ. And Robert Fosbury's described it as a cooling and a lubrication system for your mitochondria. So imagine the mitochondrion is as an engine. The cooling system is the melatonin, which is being made on site to deal with reactive oxygen species that are naturally occurring as a byproduct of this oxidative metabolism. But you also got the lubrication, which is the infrared is helping that ATPase spin more efficiently. So just think about that is what's happening when you're outside in natural sunlight with all the visible and non-visible light, compared to what the mitochondria are having to deal with inside. Because when you're inside under artificial blue light, then you're not getting red, you're not getting infrared, you've only got blue. So you're not allowing those natural antioxidant lubrication and cooling mechanisms to occur. So and the mitochondria also absorbing the isolated blue specifically without those kind of backup or mitigation measures. So you're going to be accumulating oxidative stress at a much higher rate, and you're not able to dampen it down like you are when you're outside.
Yeah, okay, cool. That's exactly what I was wondering. So when we're outside, when we've got the red and the infrared and the other frequencies, they're kind of turning on other things which are kind of offsetting some potential negatives from blue light. Whereas if we just have blue light, then we don't have the other stuff to mitigate. Yeah, okay, cool.
Exactly, and not only blue but UV too, and that gets into this whole discussion about UV light and health. And dermatology profession has literally put UV light in a sack and kind of kicked it on the ground for the past however many decades, not realizing that beyond vitamin D synthesis, this is, and that's another whole issue that I won't really go into, but vitamin D sufficiency is not just about preventing preventing rickets and adequate bone health. It's about immune system function. It's about regulating metabolic health, and then we've got things like POMC, propionic, which relies on UV light. We've got nitric oxide. So the kind of centralized dermatology has discarded or conveniently ignored all these fundamental physiological roles of ultraviolet light, and then kind of taught everyone to wear sunscreens and cover up. But the problem is that we know that UV light is necessary for health, and when we neglect that reality, people getting sick, people get cardiovascular disease, cancer mortality. The long-term epidemiological studies in not only the UK, and there's one published recently, the UK Biobank study, showed that there's reduced cardiovascular mortality, there's reduced cancer mortality with people living and getting more at a lower latitude and getting more ultraviolet light. And this was even controlling for these other kind of confounders. So it's a critical part of this picture. And just like you made the mention that the blue light, when we're outside, we've got these built-in mitigation measures. The same thing happens when we're in ultraviolet light naturally, and we're prepared for that ultraviolet light. So what I mean by that is that we had that morning red and infrared to precondition the skin. It actually prepares the skin for the ultraviolet arrival later in the day. So it reduces the burning time, the burning capacity, the capability of the skin to burn. And then when we optimize the circadian rhythm, the body's expecting the sun at the right time. And then we can talk about dietary stuff too, but it's another example of how people have used the sun incorrectly, and then it's basically been blamed for the ultraviolet light wavelengths themselves have been blamed. And again, we could talk about the way that these studies have been done and isolating ultraviolet out of context. That's also contributed to this this scientific confusion. But there are these inherent mechanisms that we've evolved over the process of billions of years to exist and gather energy and derive health benefit from this massive fusion reactor in the sky, which is again at the center of the whole food web and whole of life on Earth.
Yeah, awesome. Yeah, I was aware of the UV being balanced as well. I forgot to mention it, but that's why. Well, I'm not entirely sure. I haven't read that much into this, but that could perhaps be why many people think sunbeds are kind of a bad idea, because you're just getting UV like artificially, but you're not getting the red and infrared as well.
Yeah, I mean, you're isolating a wavelength. And look, there might be a role for isolated wavelength in something like photobiomodulation. I think that is kind of an exception where we can kind of maybe strip out the others and give just red and infrared, and that can be done in a safe way. But even Dr. Cruz said on a recent podcast he believes that some photobiomodulation companies are really potentially administering certain wavelengths in the infrared spectrum that could be harmful. And unless we do this properly, if we're using really reputable models and we're doing it in an educated way, then we don't want to be doing more harm than good. And Dr. Michael Hamblin, who has done massive amount of education or research into photobiomodulation. He's got a massive literature on this topic. So yeah, we have to be careful whenever we're taking things out of their natural context. That includes sunlight, but also includes food. It includes drugs. I talk about, I tell people that blue light is the meth of light. It's the methamphetamine of light because it's simply been highly refined, highly processed. Just like you refine coca leaf, you get cocaine. You refine poppy, you get heroin. You refine sugar, you get this highly addictive drug, as far as I'm concerned. So the process of healing and getting us back to an environment that we can thrive in is getting rid of the man-made refined sources of food and light.
Yeah, I agree. How do you then, or how could I or anybody else explain the importance of light, their light diet? Because I think a lot of people like kind of deep down know that, yeah, I know the food can have an effect, because they kind of think more, I'm actually putting this into me. But people, I don't think, realize light is also an input into your body, and that you can, well, obviously they know you can change it, but they don't think it's that important. So, and you said earlier that light is like, you think that comes before even diet, the first thing to change. So how do you explain to people the importance of light?
Yeah, and what I would say about that, and maybe before I answer that question, I'll just make a comment about, if you think about the mitochondria as these engines, it is what if you think, if melatonin that we talked about earlier is helping us regenerate these engines and overnight, the engine, what's more important, that the engine gets regenerated, or that you put a better fuel in the engine? And obviously both matter, and I'm using the fuel as the food. That's the analogy. But if the engine is broken and isn't getting repaired, then you can still put the 98 octane in it. But if the engine's slowly decaying because of the circadian biology is broken, and your light environment is cooked, then your Ferrari engine is slowly decaying. Even though you're putting 98% octane in it, it's still going to break. But if you're constantly using circadian biology, using your melatonin system through appropriate light signals to regenerate that engine, then the body, the mitochondria, can take probably the kind of ethanol fuel, or the lower quality octane fuel, and still kind of be okay, I think. And that's kind of one analogy of what Dr. Cruz is talking about. I would like to optimize my engine function and put 98 octane fuel in it. So that's why I emphasize both the light diet and the food diet, and particularly a low carb or carnivore. I think carnivore with raw seafood is possibly the most powerful healing protocol, and because I do believe that DHA is important on a major level. But to answer your question about communicating this to people, I think it depends who you're talking to, and it depends what level they are on. So if it is someone who is older or they've got a family history of cancer, I will tell them that whenever you expose yourself to artificial light at night, you're really just throwing a spanner in the works of your body's anti-cancer ability, because the healing that happens overnight, the secretion of melatonin, and I keep mentioning this compound. I believe it's over 1 billion years old. I think it's 1.4 billion years old, and it's found in fungi, it's found in bacteria, it's found in archaea, it's found in the most ancient organisms, because it is such an efficient antioxidant. And it was an antioxidant first, before it became a signal for nighttime, and before it became something that could help you fall asleep. And it was an antioxidant. And whereas vitamin C can kind of quench one or two reactive oxygen species before it's kind of done, melatonin has this cascade of antioxidant ability, that its metabolites are themselves highly antioxidant, have a high antioxidant function. So if I'm trying to explain this to someone, I would say, when you expose yourself to artificial light at night, when you don't get out and get that healthy infrared onto your skin, you're depriving your body of its most powerful anti-cancer fighting agent, that is helping do the cellular garbage cleaning. That is what apoptosis and autophagy is. It's cellular garbage cleaning. It's taking out the broken components and getting rid of them. It is basically helping those mitochondrial and preserving the mitochondrial DNA and preventing them from being damaged. And maybe that's a bit kind of another rabbit hole to go down, but mitochondrial heteroplasmy, this idea that you accumulate mutated mitochondrial DNA inside your mitochondria, that is at the root of a lot of mitochondrial dysfunction. And if you're not getting that sunlight, then you're going to accumulate more mitochondrial mutations. Your cells are going to become more dysfunctional, and it's more likely that one of them is going to become malignant. So that's what I'll say to someone who wants to hear the kind of cancer message, or is receptive to the cancer message. But I can talk to people about aging and the role that circadian rhythms play in aging. You're going to prematurely age yourself if you're not sending the right clock timing signals. Obesity, the fact that you can make yourself overweight, hyperglycemic, and by simply looking at blue light. That's what the physiology will do to you. So it's a little bit nuanced, but I think that you have to kind of find where people are at and then speak to them, speak their language.
Yeah, for sure. If you could go back to yourself, like when you were a younger doctor, what is something you wish you could tell yourself?
Yeah, I would say that part of me would, I would tell myself about how important light is and how important food is. And reflecting back on periods of my life, everyone goes through roller coasters of health troubles, of low mood, all this kind of thing. So part of me would want to tell that person to look at this is the truth. But another part of me would say, you've got to make the mistakes, you've got to go through this, because this is what is going to allow you to make a difference and understand and learn. And I'm of the opinion that what we go through and what we deal with, and that's difficult, that's challenging, that makes us feel frustrated, that makes us feel angry sometimes, or hopeless, when you come out the other side of that experience, you are undoubtedly stronger. So I'm actually grateful. I'm grateful that the dermatologist kind of whacked me on the heavy medication without talking about lifestyle, because that's been the catalyst for me to go on this journey. So I guess my message would be, and mindset is key, perspective is key. Even though you're going through something difficult at the moment, know that you're going to look back and be grateful for that opportunity, because it's going to teach you a lesson, or it's going to show you a truth that you need to know to kind of level up.
Yeah, that's a really good point, because a lot of times it's like pain or discomfort, there is like a lesson hidden in there, but you just got to be kind of willing to listen. There's this business guy, you might know him, Alex Hormozy, and he said the work works on you more than you work on it. And I thought that was really interesting, that like the processes that we go through, our experiences, like they shape us, and it makes sense if you think about it. But that sounds kind of like what you were saying there, that you had to go through it to get to kind of where you are now, so you don't necessarily wish to change any of it.
Exactly. And these are all gifts. These are all gifts, but only some people see them as gifts. And what I mean by that is, everyone has given a range of challenges, of obstacles, and the people that succeed, the people that are happy, the people that make something of things, they see what happened to them as a gift, as an opportunity to improve. And I think it's the difference between in patients that I see, the ones that want to get better and the ones that heal are the one able to see things and kind of move forward, and then use what they've gone through as kind of fuel. I like the analogy of a trampoline, and the kind of lower you go in life and do something difficult that's happened, the higher you can bounce back up. And in that way, you really are grateful for the troughs, because it implies, and this is a kind of Taoist concept, but the depth of the trough implies the height of the peak. So yeah, I think it's fundamental, and perspective and attitude therefore becomes the most important thing.
Yeah, yeah, that's great. Just I know it's coming up. It's been nearly an hour now. Do you want to hop off soon, or are you okay to keep going a bit longer?
Oh, I've got probably another 10 minutes.
Yeah, cool, cool. I think you mentioned that. I think you said carnivore with raw seafood. You think is potentially the most healing. Why raw seafood? Does the DHA or other nutrients get like denatured or changed or something?
Yeah, I think it's the most bioavailable function is the fact that it's in its raw form, and there's some comments that the DHA can be inhibited if you kind of cook it in butter or cook your fish in butter and this kind of thing. But if we take a really kind of basic approach and listen, kind of individual approach, when I eat raw sashimi, raw oysters, and raw shellfish, you feel like $1 million, and I think that kind of speaks to as much as I need, and in terms of their evidence. Obviously, got to respect basic food hygiene standards, but anywhere where you buy sashimi, they have a pretty rigorous food safety regime. Caught a fish that day and you cook it that night, or eat some as sashimi. It's amazing. Like you can't beat it, and the freshness and the taste and how you feel that kind of half an hour after will tell you how your body liked that, how it agreed with it. And if you feel amazing, you feel fantastic, then you've just given your body what it needed nutritionally.
You talked about bioavailability there. Do you think that also applies to steaks and like meat as well? Do you not necessarily want to just cook it well done, just cook it all the way through? You want to maybe leave it a bit pink in the middle? Is there like benefit to that potentially?
Yeah, I think there is. I prefer to eat steaks on the rarer side, and yeah, and anecdotally, people kind of digest better when it's less cooked. I mean, we have to be careful. Again, this is not about getting foodborne illnesses, and provenance is key, sourcing is key, but the French make beef tartare. You eat raw beef carpaccio. This is not something new. This isn't something fringe. I mean, your ancestors have been eating raw animal products for the duration of our life on Earth. So it's about being smart about it, I think.
Yeah, yeah. Quality is definitely important. Don't just find some random animal on the side of the road and just start eating it. Um, you mentioned earlier that I think the photoreceptors are linked to vitamin or vitamin, if we want American, A, and that is kind of linked to the mood with the isotretinoin. So what's the story there?
Yeah, so the the exact mechanism escapes me, but I believe the when you're ingesting the synthetic retinol, which essentially is a vitamin A analog, you're interfering in this pathway of photoreceptor regeneration. So that is one mechanism why maybe some people get changes in their vision. Um, Particularly, I believe it was night vision in the paper that I was reading. The other point about the melanin, and it's a great place to make mention of this, and that those melanopsin receptor rich intrinsically photosensitive ganglion cells, not only are they mediating blue light and kind of that signal, so they're basically porting to that hypothalamus, to your suprachiasmatic nucleus. They also send a synapse to the habenular nucleus, which is this area of the brain that is involved in mood. So if people are depressed or anxious or have any other kind of mood disorder, then regulating your circadian rhythm needs to be the first thing that you do, because again, spamming those receptors with blue light 18 hours a day when that's not what they need and not what they expect, that is going to be directly contributing to depression, and mental health issues. So that's just about some basic physiology that people should realize. And to heal depression, you need to have a regulated circadian rhythm.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense because circadian rhythm is tied to like inflammation, hormone production, which are both involved in kind of mood and mental health problems. And I think also if we look to like bright
Oh,
light,
it's 70% of the genome. Is 70% of the genome has a circadian regulation, and we didn't talk about these molecular mechanisms, but there's what's known as transcription translation feedback loop, which is this elegant way, and this won a Nobel Prize in 2017 for the guys that worked this out. It's basically this feedback loop that allows a cell to time itself on that 24-hour cycle. So it's all these all of your cells are running on a clock that's 24 hours in length approximately, but it needs to be synced. It needs to be synced up to your hypothalamus, and it needs to be synced with external light cues. It needs to be synced with meal timing. And when you send those wrong signals, or you stop timing or giving those timing inputs properly, then there's chaos. There's absolute chaos because the cell doesn't know what to do, when to do it. That's why you get disease. And to hammer home the point about obesity, when they've knocked out or they mutated these clock enzymes, clock genes in mouse models, the mice get fat and insulin resistant. So that's how critical everything goes back to circadian biology.
yeah, I was going to add for the mood side of it that if we look to like bright light exposure is often used for people who have like SAD, seasonal affective disorder, and I know some people in the UK. I heard them saying that like, oh, this winter I'm going to like the Canary Islands, which is I don't know what the latitude is, probably something. It's like in line with North Africa. They're islands off the coast of Morocco, and they were going there, so like specifically for their mental health. And I was like, that's interesting, and that makes a lot of sense with what you were saying with the mood and circadian rhythms.
Yeah, well, I mean, what's your mood worth? Is it worth $500, $1,000? If it means the difference between depression and not, then I would definitely encourage people to make a journey. And if they're in America, they can fly to Mexico or Caribbean, or if they're in Australia, they can fly up to Bali. And if they're in the UK, fly to Greece, Spain, Canary Islands. Make the trip, because building your melanin, getting that correct circadian signals, eating a heap of fresh DHA-rich seafood. This is what I talk about in my course about how to improve things on a fundamental level. You have to give your body its fundamental needs, and your mental issues will be greatly improved.
Yeah, absolutely. I think we'll just round up here with I think key thing that people need to realize is that these things are solvable. It's not necessarily genetic. You're not like doomed to just get ill once you hit like 50 years old. There are things you can do. Some are more convenient than others perhaps, but keep like exploring, keep looking for ways to fix this, because I think like a lot of people are kind of almost think they're stuck with this, like, I can't do anything. But I think we need to like empower people to kind of take their health into their own hands a little bit more, and like kind of look at how they can improve. So thanks for doing this, Max. It's been a really interesting conversation. Where can people find your podcast, find you on social media, and your courses?
Yeah, so my podcast is called Regenerative Health Podcast. It's on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, all the podcast platforms, and that's where I talk about circadian rhythms and regenerative farming. We haven't talked about that, and carnivore and animal-based diets. So it's basically 3 pillars that I believe we need to move towards if we're going to help people on a large scale get healthy again. And then I'm on Twitter, Dr_Max Gulhane, which is my Instagram, and my Twitter is mgulhanemd. And if you go to my website, which is drmaxgulhane.com, then I've got some course offerings. I've got a monthly Q&A group where we get some exciting guests on. I do a Q&A, and we just talk and support people. So yeah, that's what I'm doing. And I'll be, for those if you have any listeners in Australia, I'll be speaking at a couple of events next year here in Australia. So that's all on my website too. So yeah, thanks, Owen. Thanks for the conversation. And yeah, I really echo your statement, which is disease is not foregone conclusion by any means. You have the power, and you just have to be curious. You have to be willing to make some lifestyle changes, but it's definitely worth it at the end of the day.
Yeah. Okay. Awesome. I'll put all the links to your socials and website and all that in the show notes. Yeah, it's been really great. Maybe we can do a part 2 at some point.
Definitely.
All right. Thanks, Max. Have a good rest of your day.
See ya.
Bye.
Thanks.
If you enjoyed this episode with Dr. Max, I'm sure you'll love this one too. Check it out.